I'm very pleased to pass the ball right away to my friend and colleague, Traci Morris, who I think you're all going to enjoy getting to know a little bit as she introduces just a first-rate panel tackling the question of connectivity in tribal nations across the land. Traci is here at Arizona State University. Her official title is Executive Director of the American India Policy Institute. She is both a local, regional, and national authority on policy issues. It turns out, thankfully for me, her specialty is actually broadband, which actually just has meant that I have thoroughly enjoyed learning from Traci, studying some of the reports that she has produced, including co-authoring them with some of the people who are on the panel today, which includes some, again, longtime friends and colleagues dedicated to being of support to the tribal nations. And with that, Traci, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Chukma, Hachi Chokmata, Soholcha Foat, Traci Morris, and Choka Chafa, Holcha Foat, Inkoni Homa, Chakasha Seya. Thanks for the introduction, Lev, and hello and greetings to everybody here. I'm a member of the Chickasaw Nation, so I just introduced myself in Chickasaw, but I want to acknowledge that I'm on Autumn land, and I acknowledge their sovereignty as an indigenous people. So I guess I can skip my introduction because Lev gave a good overview of everything. So what I want to do is I'm going to set us up today by giving a quick overview, and then I'm going to turn to each of my colleagues and get a little bit from them. So let me start by saying, obviously, you know, our panel today is about connecting tribal lands, but I really want to back up just a smidge and remind everyone that tribal lands are part of a family of governments in the United States, and that the federal government is obligated via treaties to the federal trust responsibility for tribes. With regard to what we're talking about today, this has led to congressional actions and monies targeted specifically for tribal broadband, which we're going to talk about. So Indian country is a term we're going to use, probably all of us at some point in this presentation, but that is 574 sovereign federally recognized tribal nations on 334 reservations in 35 states on 100 million acres of land. And in 2020, let's back up, the world clearly saw the digital inadequacies in Indian country that already existed before COVID and how they were exacerbated by the pandemic. Native Americans, we're the canary in the coal mine, and the lack of broadband access is literally life and death on rural tribal lands. It's not too strong to say that we died because of lack of access to broadband infrastructure with no access to information or telehealth in some cases. Now Congress has responded, and Indian country is seeing unprecedented opportunities with literally billions of dollars available for broadband infrastructure coming from the Consolidated Appropriations Act, the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Literally right now, there's $980 million specifically available for through the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. But a full half of the 574 tribal nations have responded by applying. So clearly there's interest, but they applied to the rate of about 5.8 billion with a B for a fund of only 980 million with an M. So let that sink in. Clearly there's interest, but there is not enough money. While tribes can leverage other monies from the USDA RU Rural Utility Service Reconnect program and such, it's not enough money. And while it's a good start, it's just really a drop in the bucket. And I think some of my colleagues are going to speak more about that. Further, we're going to need baseline measurement that doesn't even really exist. We need to document the impact of these public investments and create meaningful accountability so that recipients actually get what's promised to them. And a couple of these gaps with misinformation given to tribes from corporate and consulting constituencies, and the government failing on their congressionally mandated requirements at NTIA, the lack of leadership, making the potential for waste of this much needed public funding highly likely. So we're going to hear today from both academics and folks on the ground. I'm an academic. I'm not really an on the ground kind of gal. We have a terrific PhD candidate, Elena George, who's Navajo, who's here at ASU. And we're going to talk a bit. Well, I've already talked, but she's going to talk some, and I'll pipe in when I need to. But we're also going to have on the ground folks like Matthew Rantanen and Sasha Meinrath. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves briefly and make a few points to get the conversation started. But I think it's going to be difficult to keep us constrained into this time frame. So please pop any questions you might have in the chat. We'll endeavor to answer them live. And so, Elena, I'm going to turn that to you, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself by giving us a few points of the research you're working on.
Hey everyone, Elena George, Hi everyone, my name is Elena George, and I'm a PhD candidate at the School for the Future of Innovation and Society in the Human and Social Dimensions of Science and Technology program. I have studied broadband both in my master's, which I completed several years ago, and now in my PhD program. And right now in my dissertation, I am studying 3 ARA-funded projects, so the initial 2009 projects, and I'm using broadband as a basis to examine both road projects and energy projects from that time period as well. And so with that, I just want to go ahead and make a couple of initial points. So I just want to bring up that the initial calls to close the digital divide in Indian country started about 2006. Then President Bill Clinton visited the northern part of the Navajo Nation and gave a speech about how this was going to be closing pretty soon. But that was about 25 years ago. And I think it's safe to say those gaps persist, as Dr. Morris mentioned earlier, canary in the coal mines. And so from that time, the technology has shifted from dial-up, which was available at that time, to gig speed internet in cities now. And it's also shifted in the wireless area from like 2G speeds to 5G speeds. And so whilst tribes have had some success in getting infrastructure, such as my tribe, we have a wireless program, but it's still just a drop in the bucket. And there's still so much more we need to do. And then building up capacity. Traci says there's just a handful of people. So, and I'm just like maybe 5 people out there who know this. And so we're just pushing forward, and there's the need to build capacity, but also utilize the information that we have now. And so I just want to point out that these gaps persist because of the history of between tribes and the United States. So tribes were put on reservations because those were seen as less valuable land, and so they weren't developed at the same rate as land off of reservations. So, and it takes a lot more money to invest in them in the past. Like I said, there wasn't a lot of dial-up available on reservation lands. So in order to move forward in technology, we have to actually invest in those sort of outdated things to be able to have the same footing as everybody else. So that's about it for me, I think.
Thank you, Elena. I am so excited to see your forthcoming research. I can't even tell you. This is going to be great. Sasha or Matt, which one of you we didn't discuss? So pop in, do your thing.
Go ahead, Sasha.
All right, thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. Sasha Meinrath here. I am the Palmer Chair in Telecommunications at Penn State, and have been working on a variety of community broadband projects now for about.
Hey, Sasha, it's Lev, and we can't hear you very well.
Oh, really? Let's see.
Why don't we, if it's all right, maybe Traci go to Matt and then let Sasha see if he can troubleshoot.
Sure. I will. So this is Matthew Rantanen. I am the Director of Technology for Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. Started in 2001 building high-speed wireless microwave networks to serve the tribal communities here in San Diego County and Southern Riverside County. And over the 2+ decades that I've been involved with this, I've been entrenched in the policy pieces in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., serving terms on the Native Nations Broadband Task Force, chairing Native Public Media and being on that board for 10 years, advising the California Broadband Council. And I'm the co-chair of the Tech and Telecom Subcommittee at the National Congress of American Indians. And, I'll just make a couple of quick points, but, some of the things that Traci brought up about the funding and some of the things that I'm seeing in the chat about the 1.2 trillion infrastructure package, the National Congress of American Indians and those of us that fight the policies in the policy space for the tribal broadband piece have been foundationally asking for $1 billion to start this process for a number of years, 8 to 10 years. And back in 2001, when we started building networks in Southern California, that kind of money wasn't available, and it was unheard of. And as we migrated from small amounts of bandwidth on wireless to large amounts of bandwidth now using fiber, the evolution of networks have changed and the thought process has changed around this process. And as was said, $5.8 billion was requested out of a $980 million fund. And that is only half of the tribes applying. So first of all, why didn't the other half of the tribes apply? Where are we missing them? How are we missing them? And what are you going to do to divvy up $980 million between the $5.8 billion ask? You can't partially build any of this stuff. You have to completely build some of this stuff to make it work. You can't build half a fiber ring. What's the point? So we're missing the boat on the amount of money. Yes, there's 2 billion more coming, but during the Obama administration, I did a project with the CTO of the United States identifying 8,000 missing middle miles. So give or take some dollars, it's about $1 billion problem. So there already you have $1 billion problem just connecting back to the rest of the world. Then you look at networks on 574 nations, Traci said 334 reservations, 35 different states, and then Alaska, you have a deficit of somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 to $8 billion. Well, we've seen half the tribes apply for 5.8 billion. So maybe that inflation has jumped it over $10 billion. So we aren't even close to half of the solution in dollars to solve this problem. Tribes are much more savvy than they used to be. They have learned a lot of this technology and have made partnerships with carriers and partnership with engineers and folks that understand this and have done feasibility studies and broadband plans, and they know what they need. There just still is not enough dollars to do that. So I'll leave it at that for the moment, and I'll let Sasha introduce himself.
Excellent. And hopefully I've fixed the volume problem. Again, a thumbs up and a nod. Perfect. So hi, everyone. Sasha Meinrath. I'm here at Penn State University. I'm the Palmer Chair here, and I run something called X Lab. And for the past, over 20 years now, I've been deploying scores of different community broadband systems all around the globe, and started working in Indian country, actually with Matt back over 15 years ago, which means that we've been doing this for quite some time. And if you recollect 15 plus years ago, this was sort of the heyday of the then municipal wireless movement. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because what we saw at this point in time was unprecedented interest, tons of money being poured into this realm, and in essence, kind of lackluster performance. There are a number of wonderful networks coming out of that. But what I want to caution us against then is this notion that somehow like the money is going to solve the problem. And what I and many others have been pointing out to Biden officials, White House folks, NTA folks, FCC folks, and et cetera, is without the vanguard investment a priori beforehand in capacity building, you're really setting up a lot of folks for failure. And so we have added to this problem of, underinvesting by tens of billions of dollars across Indian country, and then providing a few billion to solve that problem, a mismatch to be sure. There is no magic that's going to allow for a multi-billion-dollar investment in this space to just magically go all to good things if you haven't first invested in the capacity necessary. This is not just expertise, but this is like tower climbing crews and folks that understand how to design networks to account for culturally sensitive areas. This means rethinking the cost of laying fiber because you need to do archaeological studies through some of the areas that you're going. And I have already seen, as NTA reviewers are saying, like, why are the costs of laying fiber so much? And we have to walk them through the realities of working in Indian country that they, the so-called experts, are completely unaware of. And so this, to me, at the beginning, before a whole lot has been rolled out, is a one-time opportunity for meaningful intervention. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing, and I do hope I'm wrong here, has been sort of a squandering of that opportunity. I would like to be able to report out to say, look, folks are doing this right. What I fear is that we're following the footsteps of BTOP or the top program before that. Not that these were bad programs, but that they didn't meaningfully move the needle on digital equity at the end of spending hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to do exactly that.
You know, one thing that comes to mind is, you know, something Elena and I were talking about yesterday. And, you know, I think people don't realize that we're not starting at a level playing field as a city or rural areas. It's not like we're starting with a baseline. In some cases, like on the Navajo reservation, I think it's still at only 70% plain old telephone service, let alone anything else or utility. And these are development of utilities. So we're not starting from a level playing field. It's not like we're starting where everybody else is. So there is that. Any thoughts on that? And is that that's adding to the cost clearly, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, where you're starting in a rural environment versus an urban environment or even a suburban environment where you have potentially a choice for broadband, you're starting in a place where it is completely greenfield build. I mean, starting from scratch. And typically these places with lack of plain old telephone service also have lack of cell phone service. So we're starting at a deficit of communications in general. And I just wanted to touch on one of the last things that Sasha mentioned, that you know, the process of the money flowing through NTIA was supposed to be announced at the last quarter of 2021. And it's not going to be announced until spring. And as we all know, spring is defined by 3 or 4 months. And so when that is announced, we don't know. The real problem is that tribes are now stuck in a timeline issue of lack of materials within the pipeline to actually purchase to build, knowing when to do those purchases, whether or not to apply for other federal funding like RUS's Reconnect program or Connect program. In the scheme of things, if they had learned their fate through the NTIA Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program in the last quarter, they would have been able to allocate other federal funding and efforts and state funding and align themselves in a timeline that made sense for a successful build and a successful project. However, with this delay that's been imposed by the Department of Commerce, these tribes are now kind of leapfrogged past some of the opportunity windows for other grants and then are sitting in the middle of an open window on some grants, whether or not they should apply for the same build with new money and then have to decline some of the money if they got both. It's really stuck them in a weird spot, not to mention the fact that you're starting from scratch in the first place. So I think we're in a situation where you know, tribes could have a benefit of having a lot more trusted partners and advisors and folks sometimes like yourselves that can support what is happening right now. Because I think as all of you are seeing in this space, there has never been a bigger lack of trusted individuals to do these builds and to do some of this work, because everybody is busy doing stuff. So there's a deficit of good players in the market, and tribes are receiving the worst end of that because they're getting into this space for the first time. Thanks.
No, that's true. And then there's not to belabor the issue, but if you're in a place like Alaska, you have a really limited time to order materials, supplies, and that has to be planned like a year out. So there are some serious timeline issues beyond, supply chain issues that everybody else is dealing with right now. Sasha, do you have any thoughts on this, or do you want to popcorn over to the question in the chat, or what are you thinking?
Well, I'll just add to that, because I think, Matt is being very kind, which is to say, this timeline is not like a nice to have. There's a statutory mandate built into, for example, the federal law that provided the $980 million, and NTA is in violation of federal law at this point in time. They missed statutorily mandated deadlines, and we're not clear when they're going to get things back on track. So tribes, trusting that the federal law was actually going to be followed, spun up a bunch of programs all over the country and are now having to have these carrying costs of programs that have been begun in anticipation of NTA following the law. And what we're being told instead is like, oh, we're going to get to this, in essence, soon. And we really don't know. I would like to get a date certain to know when tribes will know one way or the other if they've been funded or not. Because the law is exceedingly clear on this, and NTA is simply not following the law at this point in time.
I saw they have the new website up with a little map in there. It came out, Monday? I think it came out Monday. So it's like this really rudimentary map that shows where they've awarded already, which is like not very many places. So
yeah, they just issued a giant press release congratulating themselves for spending down $1 million. And I'm like, great, like one press release down, 900 and odd to go, because if they're issuing one for every $1 million they get out the door, it's like, this is absurdity.
So what are some solutions for this? Let's talk. We've got a few minutes. Let's talk about some solutions and recommendations, because yes, we know we have these issues. Some of them we've had for a long time, and they continue to be, ongoing issues. But we did learn a lot in BTOP and TOP, and it's a different place now than it was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So what are some thoughts, especially from you two that have done work on the ground? Sasha, I know you're also doing the research as well, but you both have been doing it on the ground. What is the real stuff that works that us researchers need to learn more about and document?
Well, I think this is a good forum for reaching out to some of these folks, and there's $65 billion or something on that magnitude that's going to flow through. I think 53 billion of it's going through NTIA, and most of it's headed to the states, right? So the states typically don't have the responsibility to have that tight of a relationship with their tribes, because we are federally sovereign nations, dependent of the federal government's relationship there. But I think in this day and age, it's time for states to step up and partner with their tribes and understand that, that their tribe's success is their state's success. If you look at California as an example, the governor has carved off $6 billion for broadband. 3.25 billion is going to build middle mile fiber rings using what is now called Golden State Network, an extension of Scenic. And that is actively working with all 109 tribes of California to make sure that those opportunities are presented, and that every ounce of information and value that comes out of that dollar amount the state has, and then new monies flowing through the state addresses those issues. And I can say that definitively because I have detailed over to Golden State Network for 6 months to make sure that happens properly. And I'm very excited to see that happen. And I wish that other states would take note of that and start to consider possibilities of drawing down funds and partnering with some of their tribes and actually making sure that some of that other $65 billion ends up in tribal hands. Because when tribes are applying for that and states are their competitor, the success rate is very, very low. When tribes apply for that and the state is their partner, success rate is very, very high. So that is one of the big steps that we can do.
Yeah, I would add to that, I think we've driven home well that this is actually just the beginning of a necessary investment and intervention in this space. That all of this money, even if properly deployed, still falls far short of what's actually needed to bridge the digital divide across Indian country. As such, we know we need to invest more. And one of the main issues that I keep bringing up with administration after administration, dating back the last 3 to 4 at this point in time, is the need to empirically, meaningfully, comprehensively document the actual impact of what works and what doesn't work. Like, so the radical position of scientists is like, well, first, document what on the ground reality looks like today, make whatever investments you're going to make, and then document what the impact has been. And from there, we can actually start thinking about what actually works. I surmise, and this will shock nobody, that tribes being able to do what's in the best interest of tribes is going to by far be the most efficacious intervention. And I'd like to be able to document that empirically so we don't have to keep fighting these battles over like, well, who should be empowered or allowed to do this kind of service provisioning? Likewise, what we need is leadership that's going to meaningfully acknowledge, look, there's certain entities that have created and maintained digital inequities. We wouldn't be having this conversation if that were not the case. And if you're tasking people to solve these inequities without ruffling the feathers of the people that created the inequities, I mean, come on, that's ridiculous. And so we have to be a bit more risk tolerant to say we really do need to innovate in this space. We really do need to try new business models and new processes of determining what is sustainability that better map onto the everyday realities of working in, well, any underserved community, but most explicitly in a sovereign nation located inside the United States. It's just a meaningfully different space. And I worry that that kind of vision and leadership is currently lacking. I hope I'm wrong.
I hope you're wrong too, but we've seen this. You and I in our study in 2009. You're reiterating things that we validated again in 2019 in our study in terms of community-centric models work. We know our communities. Every community is different, not only culturally but geographically and physically and such. So we know that works. I'm hopeful to see what Elena comes up with her dissertation. But I can't imagine it's not going to support that, because it also works in other areas too. We all know what our own community works and what needs it. So I think that's important. I love the idea of working more with states. I wish we could make that a more meaningful process. I think that's a really great point, Matt. Documenting, Sasha, obviously you and I've tried to fill that void in a small area, and AIPI, American Indian Policy Institute, has. I see now that Elena is, and that's I'm hopeful, but some of it is just such a monumental task on documenting too. Some of that shouldn't fall on a research institute. Some of it should fall federal, because how do you survey 574 tribes? How do you actually survey them to see what they've got and what a baseline is? What is the research process? That's not something that somebody at a research institute can do. It just takes too many people, too much time, too many human subject review forms, which is not a problem, but it would impede the time and the process. It should be a federal thing where they're collecting meaningful data that is non-biased, and you would think somebody could innovate a way to do that. That's maybe not even on. Maybe it's a app. Who knows? I don't know. There's got to be another way.
These are very solvable problems. And this is when I'm talking about the need for better leadership, it's that one has to work very hard to not document things better than they have been, right? Like, look at our national broadband maps. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars avoiding sound scientific methodology. And there's no excuse from that. That was simply because people were unwilling to address reality when it comes to US broadband connectivity. And so, it's weird to have to fight a battle where you're saying, like, let's apply scientific method to determining the efficacy of a federal program, but that's literally what I and others are arguing. And for some reason, that is not resonating with any administration, including thus far the Biden administration.
So what do we do going forward? Just a couple minutes. Can everybody respond? What are some immediate things we can do right now going forward while in the next year or two? And then, so tell me that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've taken that step, joining forces with Golden State Network and Scenic to address the issues for the 109 tribes. I'll let you know how it goes as I collect all the data with 109 tribes and make sure that they're included in the opportunity that California is building out. And I'll be able to replicate, hopefully, that process for others if they're interested, as we have a successful model being deployed here. So I'm taking that risk / step for the next 6 to 8 months to make sure that this gets done. So I'm in the weeds now, again.
Sasha?
Yeah, I would end where I began, which is the desperate need for capacity building and all hands on deck need to in essence really dramatically bolster capabilities, knowledge, information sharing, networking amongst tribal technologists. Matt's at the very forefront of this, literally hosting people from across the country at his house to help do that. There are others, of course, working on this, but I feel like what an incredible, unprecedented opportunity to actually do something with the knowledge, expertise, and bolstered capacity that we can build. And that, of course, is outside the purview of pretty much all federal programs. So like squaring this problem, making sure that Matt doesn't have to like run around trying to kludge together funding from a variety of funders to do this kind of work, to me is like, that's fundamentally essential.
Excellent. Elena, what do you think? What are some proactive things we can do right away?
I think the biggest thing is just to be aware that, like some of the people are messaging in here, that like tribes are, as we said, very different, 574. And my tribe is very different from your tribe and from a northern tribe. And so all these things exist that we're all capable of getting a piece of, but if they don't understand like why this tribe is okay with this, but this tribe isn't, then I don't know how we're going to make any progress if there are people who are funding us who still think American Indian is American Indian and it doesn't matter. So it's, I think, just raising awareness that, again, we're all unique, we all have unique needs, and just like any city is different from any city, but it's just, it seems basic, but I feel like it has to be said.
Keeping it simple. That's the best way. All right, everyone, we're out of time. Thank you very much for your thoughts and your points.